get Janice online here.
So now we got to do another one. You want to do this? Get well hurt. The pets around here. Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, let's see. Oh, we've got some really interesting chapters this week. See how much we get through. All right, let's open with prayer. Lord, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for, once again, the chance to read through the book of Ezekiel. We ask, Lord, that you would give us wisdom, discernment, and may reading this be profitable to us. So give us your peace, and continue to speak through your word. So hear our prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, Ezekiel 5. Well, I put a little recorder in. Grabbed it. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. Yes, I did. See? Age of decay. The mind is going.
You're too young for that.
All right. We'll start in Ezekiel 15, and we'll see how much 16 we can get through. 16 is actually fairly simple. Well, simple in that it's not hard to understand. But it's long and it's interesting. 15 is short.
Yeah, 15 is short, but it's kind of, not say confusing, but I kind of wonder why would they, have the title Jerusalem a useless vine? And what is this about the vine? What kind of vine were they talking about? It's not the grapevine, but as I read through it, I'm like,
Isaiah 5.
I thought about the verse, what is it, I am the vine, you are the branches.
Right.
So,
Right.
That kind of tied into my mind, but then on the other hand, it's like, well, why would all this be something in Ezekiel of a vine?
Well, looks like let's jump in. And we'll answer Lily's question. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, this is how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch from any other tree in the forest? Okay, let's pause there. Now, unfortunately, we are in this room mostly urban people. Maury knows a good deal about plants and vines and trees. So Maury, just off the top of your head, how is the wood of the vine different from branches on trees generally?
Well, branches are hard wood. A vine, you really can't make any implement out of it because it just bends all over.
Okay. So if you
burn it for firewood, but that's about it.
yeah, there's not much to it. If you, oh gosh, even just the 20 years I've lived here, they seem like they can't put in enough vineyards. And in fact, I just saw an article in the paper, not in the paper, but on the internet from a newspaper that was saying wine production will hit some lows this year because of disruption in other places of the world. And now we've had our own disruption in Napa and Santa Rosa, which boggles my mind because, again, since I moved here, it seems you've got vineyards in Lodi. I was in the foothills early in the week up in Sutter Creek area. There's vineyards everywhere up there. There seem to be vineyards all over the place now. So we shouldn't be totally unfamiliar with vineyards. Well, let's say, what if you, the lumber guys don't go down and cut down vineyards for exactly what Maury said. You got this stalk coming up out of the ground and then the vines. And so, what's the obvious answer to Ezekiel's question? How is the wood of the vine different from the branch of any other tree in the forest? Well, it grows everywhere, but you can't use it for anything. You're not going to make axe handles out of it. You're not going to build houses out of it. I mean, there's just nothing there.
Is it basically a green? I mean,
Well, it gets woody, but it's just very small. You know, it's just very small and very flexible, as Maury said.
like,
So,
You could probably make a wreath out of it that's green vines, but
Yeah.
yeah,
like together,
well, they irritate you from the
like
door.
brown.
You get
yeah.
rid of, they're not, you get rid of.
That's true. When you get ivy and some of those creeping things, they do get everywhere. But, you know, so right off, he asks this question. Is the wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? Verse 3. The answer to that is obviously no. Do they make pegs from it to hang things on? No, not really. You can't do it. And after it is thrown on the fire as fuel, and the fire burns both ends and chars the middle, is it useful for anything? Well, obviously not. It wasn't useful before, and the fire isn't going to make it any better. So, no. It was not useful for anything when it was whole. How much less can it be useful for, it can be made into something useful when the fire has burned it and charred? Well, that's again kind of an obvious answer. It's just, in terms of a wood, it's not used for anything. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. As I have given the wood of the vine among the trees of the forest as fuel for fire, so will I treat the people living in Jerusalem. I will set my face against them. Although they come out of the fire will yet consume them. And when I set my face against them, you will know that I am the Lord. I will make the land desolate because you have been unfaithful, declares the sovereign Lord. Okay. Well, let's get back to Lily's question. What's the deal with the vine? Well, let's jump back to Isaiah 5. I will sing for the one I love, a song about his vineyard. My loved one had a vineyard on a fertile hillside. He dug it up and cleared it of stones and planted it with the choicest vines. He built a watchtower in it and cut a winepress as well. Then he looked for a crop of good grapes, but it yielded only bad fruit. Now you dwellers in Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What could I have done for my vineyard than I have done for it? When I looked for good grapes, why did it yield only bad? Now I will tell you what I am going to do to my vineyard. I will take away its hedge, and it will be destroyed. I will break down its wall, and it will be trampled. I will make it a wasteland, neither pruned nor cultivated, and briars and thorns will grow there. I will command the clouds not to rain on it. The vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the nation of Israel and the people of Judah. And the people of Judah are the vines he delighted in. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. Okay. Now, if I say the Big Apple, what do you think about? New York City. If I say Beantown, what do you think about? Boston. East Coasters will know this because it's just emblematic of the Big Apple is New York City and Beantown is Boston. It's just kind of the association with that place. Now, throughout the Bible, Israel and Jerusalem are associated with vineyards. And it probably isn't new to Isaiah. Isaiah was probably talking this way because everyone talked this way. Now, it makes some sense if we use some different language. We say something like, Israel is God's chosen people. Okay, what does that mean? mean, the New Testament, the Old Testament talks about this in a variety of ways. The book of Hosea will talk about Israel as God's firstborn. Well, what does that mean?
They were the first people he chose to be his followers.
Okay.
Worship the Lord.
Okay. So, and actually the Old Testament talks about this a fair amount in terms of you weren't the greatest people, you weren't the oldest people, you weren't the largest people, but you were my people, and I'm calling you for a special purpose. And you see this in all the way through the Old Testament, that Israel is God's chosen people. Now, how on earth would this get? You actually find this kind of metaphor used actually for other plants too. Jesus curses a fig tree when he's coming into Jerusalem. But vine is one of the dominant metaphors of the Bible. In fact, if you look in Jesus' parables in the New Testament, vineyards come up again and again and again in the parables of Jesus in the New Testament. And this is because this association of Israel and Judah and Jerusalem with God's vineyard. Now, how does a vineyard make sense in this imagery? What would a vineyard...
With proper care and the vineyard will grow and branch out and provide the people with sweet fruit to make into wine or to use in cooking or whatever.
Okay.
Well, it would be if you use a picture and the people didn't recognize anything in it, they would miss the message. But if you use something that people are very familiar with, they will visualize and get the message.
That's right.
So a vine, that would seem like it makes sense. That's what grows.
Okay. And obviously they're familiar with it. Last week or a couple of weeks, we talked about Naboth's vineyard and Samaria and Ahab. Now, what's interesting is that actually a vine and vineyards and wine make a lot of sense in terms of this total picture of the Bible. So when the Bible is trying to locate us and give us a picture for who we are, and the Bible goes all the way back to the beginning of the story, where does the story of the Bible start? It starts in a what?
Garden.
In a garden. Now, a garden is an interesting idea because how is a garden different from a field?
The garden is cultivated.
It's cultivated. Often for Hebrews, a field is kind of either a wild or a semi-wild, but a garden is very much cultivated. And in fact, if you read the Genesis 2 story, it's kind of an orchard because it's full of trees. But now the mission of the man and the woman in the garden is to be fruitful and multiply and express dominion over the earth. And if you understand that in a gardening metaphor, for example, I bought some grapes yesterday at Bel Air, and they were the red ones. And they were really big, and so first I wondered, are these seedless or not? Because sometimes the really big ones have seeds. So I plucked one up and I ate it, and yet they're seedless. And I thought, these are the juiciest grapes. I thought these were the juiciest grapes I've probably ever eaten. They were fat and swollen and sweet and delicious. But now, and from Mexico probably. But now, if I go down into Lodi or Napa and I look at those grapes that they're making wine out of, will they look like that?
No.
No. How will they look?
Discarded.
It's much smaller, but
Yeah. They're much smaller, probably less sweet.
probably don't have as much sugar content as what you got.
Yeah, the one I did, it was full of sugar. I mean, it was so sweet, so juicy. Now, why the difference between the grapes that they're growing down in Lodi or Napa to make wine and the grape that I ate in Bel Air? How did that come about?
They're grown for different purposes.
Okay. And there's a lot of, there's a tremendous amount of intentionality that has gone into this. I mean, when they make wine, they not only grow the grapes a certain way and pay careful attention to all the growing conditions and then take all the different kinds of grapes. And I mean, there's an enormous science behind winemaking. And this is very much an image of what the Bible is talking about with respect to our relationship with God and nature. Okay, so what is our relationship with God and nature? Why are we here?
Spread the word.
Well, what does that mean?
Use the gospel, to these people that, let's say, don't believe or, they don't go to church or whatever. But in other words, you, first of all, you have to be a believer yourself before you can go out and try to teach somebody else. But it's like the apostles, I keep a little tabs here and there, as you know, my Bible's paper full of junk. But like the disciples are followers of Jesus, and the apostles are messengers of Jesus. So, we try to be messengers, to whoever we meet. Use Barbara as an example, talking to Barbara and knowing that where she used to go to church, so forth and on, and with all her work experience and everything, and she would like to try to get into a study class, something like this. So I said, well, we have a class on Sunday mornings, and it's a good class, and, if you like to come, I'll bring you one Sunday, but after that, if you want to come, you come on your own. That's exactly what she knows.
She'll tell you the whole story. And she tells you, if you have something bad that you do it, but if you don't, show up. And TV is really not bad.
Well, now, here's a question for you. So you're spreading the word now, but now when the Bible talks about what happens, say you get to Revelation 21, and we're in a new heavens and a new earth, why are we in a new heavens and a new earth? Because the story starts in a garden, and the story ends in a what? In Revelation 21. In a city. Now, that's not as far, it's not as different as you might imagine, because even a garden here, as we talked about, this garden of Eden is a what? It's a garden for what? I mean, what's the difference between a garden and a field? A field is kind of out there. A garden is, actually in Spanish, it's very much, it's what, it's your jardín, and it's very much assumed to be the space behind your house. If you go to Maury's house, Maury has a really lovely garden. Now, you might look at Maury's garden and say, well, I'm not sure how much of a garden is it. It's full of trees, and there's all these fruit trees, and if you ever want, you should ask Maury sometime. Say, Maury, give me a tour of your garden, and he will. What's in your garden, Maury?
Well, just a regular giant tree here is for fruit, yeah.
That's right. Maury's got really quite an extensive garden behind his house where he's got lots of trees for fruit. Well, this is almost exactly what Genesis 2 is about. But it's a garden because of his house. And you might say, what do you mean it's a garden because of his house? Otherwise, it would just kind of be an orchard. But the house is where he lives, and the garden is, in a sense, his delight. That's very much the story of Genesis 2 and 3. Except the whole creation belongs to the Lord. But in a sense, the temple is in heaven, and Eden was the garden, and the man and the woman were the gardener. And so when you get to Revelation, there's very much, that imagery is stretched, but it isn't broken. And so the question is, well, obviously in this moment we're spreading the news, but then you might ask the question, well, what does the news have to do with respect to the garden and the city? And this is where we get into the vineyard. Because, see, Maury's got fruits of his garden here.
Those are usually the Chinese dates.
90 states.
If it don't look like a raisin, it is written.
It's got a bit inside, so it'll come too hard.
Oh, Janice says good morning to all of you.
Hi, Janice.
So let's go all the way back to the beginning of the story. And God has this garden, and he fills it with trees, and he says it's very good, and he puts the man and the woman in it, and, the man names the animals, because the garden isn't just a garden, it's also a zoo, in a sense. It's got all the animals, and and God strolls there in the cool of the day. The image very much, someone who would be in Babylon and know Nebuchadnezzar would very much understand this, because Nebuchadnezzar had his hanging gardens. Solomon had his own zoo. I mean, this is what an ancient Near East royalty would have, and they would, at the end of the workday, they'd go out into their garden and they'd enjoy the trees and they'd enjoy the animals and all of this. And I don't have much of a garden at home, but I have Mookie, and I guess Mookie is my garden. But Mookie is very rebellious. He's a very rebellious dog. But now, what did God want from this garden?
He wanted it to be taken care of. And wine.
He wanted wine. Well, why would God want wine? Yes, he thought, that's right. And wine is, in a sense, kind of the perfect image of, so here, natural grapes are, kind of small, kind of bitter things. Nature plus people equals glory. And so God makes this setting, and it's good. And then he adds people to it. And what's he looking for? He wants, in a sense, people to take grapes and say, okay, well, here's these little grapes, so what can we do with these? Well, let's start playing around with them. And I've got these grapes over here, and, if you read, say, a book like Jared Diamond's Gerbs, Guns, and Steel, how did we domesticate plants? I mean, so look at so here's another fun little thing. Mark probably knows way more about this. So when you have wheat, the wild wheat plant, the seeds grow, in the stalk, and when they come to maturity, the stalk bursts, so the seeds disseminate. Why would that be?
So that they can grow more.
That's right. So the seeds the pod bursts and the seeds go out, so it go more. But a certain number of those seeds, so people began to notice, a certain number of these things didn't burst. Now that, in terms of a wild plant's genetics, looks like a problem, because, to burst means it can scatter its seed. But for the people coming along, finding the ones that didn't burst, some smart person came along and had what idea?
Cultivate it, wouldn't it?
That's right. Let's take this one, take the seeds from this one, and plant a whole field with all the seeds from the stalks that didn't burst. What do you think is going to happen?
If they water it and weed it and everything.
a lot easier to harvest.
That's right. You don't have to pick the little seeds up off the ground to eat them. They all stay on the stalk. Now, for the plant, this is a disaster. But for the people, oh, this is good. So and you know, if you look at wild corn, it's this tiny little thing. Well, so then you take some of that and you plant it, and then you get some of them that the ears are a little bit bigger, and the corns are a little bit larger. So you say, well, I'm going to take that one, I'm going to plant a whole field of that. Then you find some that are a little bit larger still, say, I'm going to take that one. So you take your best grain and you use that for your next year's field. Well, what are you doing?
You're selecting for traits that you want.
That's right. You're selecting for traits that you want. And now, you know, anthropologists guess that we started with these kinds of things. I mean, doing it with fruit is tougher because you've got grafting, but eventually, you know, we figured that out. And so that's why you go to Bel Air and you go into that fruit and vegetable section, and I got a bunch of apples, and they're from Washington, and the apples, I just saw it yesterday, I met Maury in Bel Air, and I was picking through the apple pile. Boy, those apples are big, and the seeds are small, and the fruit is sweet. It's not a natural apple. It's not a wild apple.
So were they Fuji apples? Genetic tracing? Or
Yeah.
But the Fuji that sprouts not very deep.
No?
No.
Well, at Bel Air,
Maybe next week.
at Bel Air, the apples were good. And so, you know, but this is what we've done. So nature plus people equals glory. And this is perfect. So not only with vines do you take the grapes and you improve the grapes, and then you take different grapes and you mix them together and you age them differently and you put them in different casks. And I mean, there's this entire science around grapes and wine. And so in many ways, this image is a perfect image of the whole story of the Bible of what God is looking for. Now, especially with wine, because wine has a double edge, right? So I personally, I don't drink at all. But so early in the week, we had a little retreat with some of the other pastors from Sacramento, and we actually had my old pastor from Grand Rapids come in. And so as pastors, we sit around and talk. But we were up in Sutter Creek, and so you go out to eat there, and that's big wine country. So then they come with all these different, here, you can taste this wine. And the other guys there, they know wine, and they smell it, taste it. I don't even drink the stuff. But, you know, it's enormously complicated. But what's the thing about wine? In some ways, wine can be full of glory. It can taste good. You can have a refined taste. If you drink a little bit of it, you feel happier. The mood livens. I mean, this is what, you know, everyone in Israel understood about wine. They weren't teetotalers. But you remember the story of old Noah. He gets off the ark. He plants a vineyard. He makes some wine. And what does he do with it?
He drinks it.
He gets drunk on it. And so right there with this image of grapes and wine, we begin to see the complexity of this story and our relationship to it. On one hand, no other creature in all creation can make wine. Wine, in a sense, happens naturally. C.S. Lewis makes the point that when Jesus turns water into wine in John chapter 4, well, God turns water into wine every day. It just takes a long time, and we steward it. But God is always turning water into wine. But now, here's the thing with us in glory. We take all the stuff that God gives us, we take the power and capacity God has given us, we make this glory, and we also corrupt it. So, and so this, in this way, so now let's again look at chapter 15. How is the wood of the vine different from that of the branch of any other tree of the forest? How is the wood ever given to make anything useful? Now Israel as a vine is kind of a really great picture of nature plus people equals glory, all within God's plan for his creation. This is God's plan for his creation. And when we talk about spreading the word, well, this is what, in many ways, this is what we're spreading the word for. God wants us to fulfill this equation. Nature plus people equals glory. Now the problem is the people. That's us. And the problem is exactly what happens in Genesis 1, where we take nature and we twist it. And actually, I should maybe change this and say nature plus people equals God's glory. And in a sense, what we try to do is nature plus people equals our glory. Now, what's the difference between nature plus people equals God's glory versus nature plus people equals our glory? It's different. Oh, how's it different?
We're doing it for us, not about.
Okay, but, all right, but what's the problem with that? Because actually, I'd say nature plus people equals glory. In proper order, it's God's glory and ours, because we all enjoy that. But somehow when it gets over here, well, let's talk about wine some more. Let's say there's an expert vintner, I think that's the right word for a maker of wine, an expert vintner who makes great wine. And he puts his label on it, which is fine, because you go to the store, and, oh, I like the label, I like this guy's wine, let's say. But let's say the guy, every time, if you go to, let's say you go to wine tasting at the guy's vineyard, and he passes out the wine, and he keeps saying, I made that, And he keeps talking about how smart he is, how clever he was to buy the land that he bought, what a great deal he got on all of his stuff, what a wonderful businessman he is. Now, he might be serving the best wine in the world, but are you going to want to go there and taste his wine?
No, I would leave.
Why would you leave?
He's too into himself.
And this is...
And see, I would go, because I would want to see, is he right? Because if he's not right, I'm talking.
Well, and this is, if you've got a gift, the question is, okay. I love it when people call me on Sunday morning. If you've got a gift, we all kind of know the best way to hold the gift is to give it. And to let the glory be the glory. And to not put yourself in the middle of the glory all the time. We have problems with people who are always calling attention to themselves. It's all about me. Everything is about me. We hear enough of that and we're like, boy, I'll drink lesser wine just not to have to deal with the insufferable egotism. Well, here's the irony about God. God makes the vineyard. He gives it. It's a gift. Now, this kind of situates glory in the right way. Where, and you read this all the time in the Old Testament, the creation gives glory to God and enjoys. Now, let's say, if I were a wine connoisseur and I found some little vineyard down in Lodi that I thought would have the best wine, I might say, let's go to this little vineyard down in Lodi that has the best wine. Let's go together. And I'd take you there and I'd give you a glass and I'd wait to see the look on your face. Well, what's happening there in that story?
feel like you do about the wine, if it's going to, happy or, you know, we, as I say, you said it's, nature plus people's, God's glory, you're gonna see how he's feeling.
That's right.
You're looking for affirmation of your own.
I'm probably looking for some of that, but the reason I want to take you hopefully isn't just about me. Hopefully I want to take you because I found joy. And I want to share that joy with you. And I want you to experience that joy. And so this is part of God's glory. And this is part of God's mission. So God makes this world in Genesis 1 and says it is good. And he brings the man and the woman in and says, okay, develop this. And he's just, so Jared came back from college, and Jared got an engineering degree, and we said, okay, Jared, it's your birthday. What do you want for your birthday? And he said, well, I kind of like a 3D printer. I don't know if you all know what a 3D printer is. It's these machines now that you get these plastic spools, and basically you can make things, little plastic things out of it. And so we said, okay, Jared, go do your research. And he found a used one on Craigslist, and he and I went up and bought it from some guy, and it sits in our garage. And so he designs something on the computer, and he puts it on a little chip, and he puts it in there, and he's making these tiny little plastic things. And so he made a little plastic deer, and then he's making, you can make pretty much anything about this big or smaller out of plastic with one of these things. But every time he makes something new, or makes something new and demanding for him, he brings it to us and he shows it to us. And what do we do as parents?
Oh, how nice. Yeah.
We celebrate it. So and this is kind of the picture of what creation is supposed to be. God gives us these seeds. And you imagine God's just waiting and saying, okay, we got these people over here, we got this field over here, we got these seeds over here. Can't wait to see what they do with it. Then, first everybody's picking seeds up off the ground, eating them. And one person goes over and says, hey, look at this one. This one didn't burst. And then this thing goes on a few years and he says, I got an idea. I'm going to collect the 1 in maybe 100 of the stalks that didn't burst. And I'm going to put it over here, and next year I'm going to clear out this whole field. I'm going to take the seeds of those, I'm going to put them in the field, and then for the next few months they all watch and watch and watch, and sure enough, gets to the end and there's a whole field, and some of them burst, but most of them didn't. And he says, this sure beats picking up all those little seeds off the ground. And it begins in cycle after cycle after cycle after cycle. And what we're looking for, in a way, is to say at the end of the season, we bring the seeds to the temple, to the place where we meet God, and what do? We lay the seeds in front and say, look what we did. And then God looks at that and says, yeah, isn't that something? Isn't that funny how I made that little genetic mutation where on one hand, most of them burst because, the plant's got to survive. But there's a little mutation where a few don't burst. And you figured that out. And you took those seeds and you made a field. And then you made a field and you got grain from that field. And with that grain, what did you do with that grain? Did you eat it raw? Well, maybe you started by eating it raw, but one of you figured out what? First you grind it. You made it into flour. Then you took the flour, and one of you figured out how to do what?
Make bread.
Make bread, how to bake bread. And in a sense, we're talking the same thing as the vine and the vineyard. This is glory. So then when you come to the temple the next year, you're not just bringing a sack full of grain, you're bringing bread. Oh. And God is pleased. Why is he pleased? Because his children are doing exactly, and here's the glory. Well, God doesn't eat bread, but he gets the glory, doesn't it? And what do we get? We get the joy of the discovery of all of this. Okay, so this is so Israel is God's vineyard, and they're supposed to make wine, and they're supposed to, they're going to bring the wine. Well, first fruits offering. They're going to bring the wine to the temple, to the tabernacle, and say, Lord, here is our gift to you. Now, the Israelites know, that they're not playing any games of deceit where we're going to have this statue and we're going to pour the wine over it because that's somehow the God. No, the Israelites know. We bring it to the temple and actually the priests will eat the wine. Well, why is that important? Because, where do the priests come from? Well, if you look back in the Old Testament, God says, all the earth is mine. First of all the earth is mine. But I'm going to share it with you. And so you might think, well, what would be a fair split between two parties? If you had one sibling and your mom sat down and said, I have a piece of cake. You two can share it. What would the two probably do?
Cut it in half.
Cut it in half. God says, the whole earth is mine, but I'm going to share it with you. What am I going to give you? He says, here, I'll make a split with you. You keep 90, I keep 10. Oh, it's a lot better deal than 50-50. You keep 90, I keep 10. Okay? So, then they said, every child you have belongs to me. But I'll just take the firstborn. Well, then that goes on in Israel, and God says, that's just kind of, it's just kind of cumbersome to take the firstborn of everyone. So actually, what does God do? How many tribes are there? So he says, here's even a better split. I'll take one. One tribe will represent the offering to the temple. You know which tribe that is? Well, the Levites. The Levites are mine. So when you bring your offerings to the temple, who's going to eat it? The Levites. That's how the system works. But now, here's the funny thing, what he's kind of saying with, God is saying about the whole earth, the whole earth is mine. But I will take Exodus 18. Israel is my firstborn. They're also my priests. So, whole earth. Israel are my priests. They're like the Levites. Well, you guys are kind of like the vineyard. You guys are kind of like the wine. So you're my wine. But you're not good for the stuff like the other trees. Well, who are the other trees? Babylon, Assyria, Egypt. They're like the big trees. They're the big trees who are useful. Little Israel, she's just a vineyard. She's not the meat and potatoes. She's the wine with the meal on God's table. But, okay, now let's read verse chapter 15. Son of man, how is the wood of a vine different from that of a branch from any other tree in the forest? In a sense, he's saying, I own all the forests. I own Assyria. I own Babylon. I own Egypt. I own the Persians. I own the Romans. Romans aren't on the scene yet. I own the Greeks. Greeks really aren't on the scene yet, at least for Israel. I own the whole earth. You guys are the table wine. Is the wood ever taken from it to make anything useful? You guys are the table wine. Do they have pigs? Or do they have pegs from it to hang things on? And after it is burned in the fire as fuel, and fire burns on both ends and chars the middle, is it then useful for anything? It was not useful for anything when it was whole. How much less can it be made into something useful when the fire has burned into it and it is charred? Okay, now there's something subtle going on here. You very much have the image of the fire and the judgment that Israel undergoes, but implicit in this story is the assumption that Israel didn't want to be the table wine. Israel wanted to be a peg, or a chair, or a spear, or a timber. And God said what to Israel? What was Israel supposed to be?
The wine.
The wine. So it didn't function. It didn't do as it was supposed to be done. So God burned it up. Again, you go to the New Testament and the Old Testament, you'll find parables like this. Farmer goes out to a field, looks in the field. The field isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Let's say somehow the farmer goes to his field, and he goes to the field and discovers, well, he thought he had planted the grain that would hold the pod, but something happened and all the grain released the pod. What do you think the farmer's going to do that field, especially in the ancient world? You don't have a tractor. You know the easiest way to clear a field? You burn it. It's the easiest way. Turning a field over, without a disc and a plow and all we got today, boy, that's a whole bunch of work. You want to get rid of everything that's in the field, and it's all dried up. We know what dry fields look like right now. Take a match to it, whoosh! Burn that sucker up. Clear that land out. The Haitians, when we were, living in the Dominican Republic, even in a very wet climate, all the time, you slash and burn. This was pretty common farming around the world. Now today, you look at that and say, well, first of all, you're going to release a lot of carbon and so on and so forth. But in the ancient world, you burn that field up. All these plants are useless. It's the easiest way to clear it. Well, in a sense, this is what God is saying to Israel. I burned you up. Well, the fire's gone over it. And then Israel's like, well, we're still going to be a peg or a chair or a spear or an axe handle. And God's saying,
First you gotta be the wine.
First you got to be the wine. That's right. I didn't plant you. You're not cedars of Lebanon. You're my vineyard. And I want you to be my vineyard. And the reason you got torched before was Isaiah 5. I was looking for good grapes, and it was bad. How do I clear it? I thought, this vineyard, these vines are terrible. Burn it all. Get it out of there. I don't want it. I'm going to have to plant new. Look at Jesus' parables towards the end of the Gospel of Matthew. Parables of the vineyard. Again and again and again. Now, what's interesting is you get into a lot of the rest of the New Testament, which is written to Gentiles, the vineyard talk kind of goes away. Well, why? Well, because they're not Israelites. But you find it in John, and you find it with Jesus in the Gospels, and you find it in John 15. I am the vine, you are the branches. Abide in me, and I will abide in you. A vine cut off from its root just withers and dies. The Father prunes the vine. Well, why does the Father prune the vine? To make it more fruitful. Oh, the Father's acting like a gardener in that story. So, if God were talking to New York City, he'd talk about apples. If God were talking to Boston, he'd talk about beans. He's talking to Israel, he's going to talk about vines. And we'll get into chapter 16 next week. Because now we're going to talk about sex. And we're going to talk about a girl exposed to death. And then what God did and what she did. So, any questions or comments?
We talked all about the wine and everything and so forth and that. And sometimes, they use wine for medicine too.
That's right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, and even today, it's funny because a lot of the people who are alcoholics are really self-medicating. Alcohol is a really interesting drug. How is alcohol an interesting drug? What does alcohol do?
It kind of numbs everything,
That's right. That's right.
especially the brain.
That's right.
thinking part.
During the Civil War, if you don't have anesthesia and you're about to amputate somebody's leg, what do you start giving them? Alcohol. Get them good and drunk. And better yet, get them drunk enough to have him pass out. Because you're about to cut off his leg. It's a whole lot better than doing it when, you're going to have to hold the guy down on the table. And, look at, let's say, Daniel. Daniel would, he drank all the time. Well, why does he drink all the time? Well, he had a mood disorder. And what his mood disorder would sometimes make him manic, which is very happy and very excited, but later on, very depressed. Well, he would drink all the time, and alcohol would kind of enliven the high, but it would kind of take the edge off the low. That's why depressed people drink often, even though, ironically, alcohol is a depressant. But they don't feel their depression as much when they're drunk. So you're right, Lily. Alcohol, all the way to, you can find in the book of Proverbs, give wine to the people who give wine to the poor so they can forget their misery. But also, into the 19th century, drink a little wine for your stomach. The doctor might even now tell you what about wine and your artery health. Drink a cup of wine every day. It's good for your arteries. So, no, that's right.
Well, be careful too, but a lot of times, especially with me, when I go to the doctor, first thing they want to know, do you smoke, or you drink, or you this or that, So, I mean, it just kind of comes to me, how they use all the wine or whatever, to help the patient, in some cases it helps your body. There's something about that. I don't know everything about it, but I know a little bit, but on the other hand, a little bit, like the doctor would say sometimes, a little bit, you can drink a little bit, as long as you don't do it excessively.
That's exactly right. In moderation.
Yep, everything's in moderation.
Oh, that's right. And so here we are with the story of wine. And this is the story of Israel. It's the story of Noah. It's all throughout the Bible. And then in John 4, when Jesus makes all of that wine for the wedding banquet, well, this then gets into the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Amos, where the reaper overtakes the plowman, where God gives in so much abundance. But here's the thing about abundant wine. If I were to tell Daniel, I'll give you as much booze as you can drink for free, it'd probably kill him. Because he couldn't modulate his own consumption. But now if God says, I'll give you as much of anything as you want, well, in this state, most of us would probably kill ourselves with something. But the point is that when we're redeemed, hopefully we can say, we can handle this kind of wealth. This gets into the whole story about what we are, who we are, and how we are. We're out of time. Let's pray. Lord, this is our story. You give us nature, and with it, we should turn things into glory, into your glory. And we don't. fact, this is the story of our trouble. And it's the story of Israel's trouble. Lord, with Jesus, Jesus begins to retrain us to be the wine, to be the winemakers who can handle the wine. Help us, Lord, to learn from this. Help us, Lord, to not try to be a chair or an axe when you want us to be the table wine. Give us your Spirit and give us your peace. We ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.